Story 1. I work at a distillery and am currently getting laid off. My job ends at the end of next month. The issue is that this is a really bad time for the tariffs to hit. During the previous administration, the bourbon industry was experiencing a boom, and the tariffs did not devastate the industry due to overall high demand. Yes, we lost around $500 million in profit because the upward trend in Europe stopped and so did their imports, but the profit margin was so high everywhere else that it didn't matter. This time around, especially with Canada and the timing, it hurts. Canada imports a lot of bourbon, especially the brand I bottle, Boo Light. Roughly 10% of the export market for bourbon from Kentucky goes to Canada. If it were still 2016 or 2017, this wouldn't be a problem. But it's 2025 and the bourbon boom is ending. The market is oversaturated, and the customer base is no longer growing. Additionally, if you look at the trends of Generation Z, they do not drink, not even close to the previous generations. With the economy generally trending downward as well, customers will opt for something different. They won't buy the $35 bottle of bourbon when they can get a cheaper case of beer for 1/3 the price. The industry could have either shored up production over time and braced for the end of the bourbon boom without the former president or continued the boom with him. Both the end of the bourbon boom and his presidency are why layoffs are rampant in Kentucky. About 1,000 full-time jobs have been lost in the past month that I know of, and there are probably more that I don't know about. So how do I feel about a trade war with one of our closest allies and trading partners? It is ridiculous. It is affecting thousands of people across a wide segment of the economy. And for what purpose? Respect? Fairness? It makes me angry that people around me voted for this when we all saw it coming from a distance. It is harmful and hurts good working-class people everywhere, and we deserve better. Also, to our Canadian friends, many of us did not support this, so we understand your frustration. Story 2. I'm sitting next to a Trump supporter from work right now. He says he's not really into that kind of stuff and doesn't really research politics. Story 3. As a Kentuckian, most people here believe the tariffs are a strategic move. They will not begin to question the president's strategy until jobs are lost on a large scale and distilleries close. Story 4. I am a lifetime Kentucky resident and a logistics manager who understands how tariffs work. This situation will significantly harm our economy. Already, Brown-Forman, located in Louisville, which owns Jack Daniel's and Woodford Reserve, has laid off 12% of its staff. The bourbon industry was already slowing, and tariffs have worsened the situation. Both alcoholic spirits and logistics will be heavily affected. Louisville is home to the largest United Parcel Service hub, known as Worldport. Millions of shipments from around the world are processed here, generating substantial revenue for the city. With tariffs in place, we will likely see a decline in imports, which will also decrease the revenue generated by international traffic at Worldport. People will be affected by this decision much sooner than we expect. That being said, I completely support Canada in its decision to start cutting ties with the United States. What former President Trump and Elon Musk have done is unforgivable and shameful. They are an embarrassment to the American people, blatantly choosing to kneel to Vladimir Putin and his regime. If Canada ever decides to resume fair trade with the United States after this betrayal, we will appreciate their kindness and strive to rebuild trust. Until then, Canada must prioritize its own interests, and that is precisely what it is doing. Story 5. Even when the tariffs are lifted, the Canadian market will remain hostile to American goods for a long time. Potentially generational damage has been caused by the situation regarding the 51st state. Story 6. Many of the responses are aimed at criticizing Kentuckians, so I want to provide an actual response. My biggest concern as a Kentuckian is not only that people are not going to buy $9.3 billion in goods from our state, but also that the consequences will be felt for generations. Many people may not realize that most distilleries in our state are located in small towns. They are often the backbone of the local economy in these areas, and in some cases, the entire county. When these distilleries start laying off employees, there are few job options available. These families will likely lack the resources to find work elsewhere, and with limited interest in real estate in those areas, they will be burdened by their own assets. Many of these towns already struggle with cyclical poverty, and this situation will make it even harder to solve. To be clear, I understand that Kentucky is often viewed as a laughingstock, and as a liberal living here, I can confirm that many perceptions are justified. Personally, I fully support the boycott. I can only hope there is a way for our country to correct its course, but I am not optimistic. Regarding my previous comments on this issue, I am a grocery data analyst, and this topic is quite complex. I could write for hours about the downstream effects of the boycott, including its impact on distribution companies, warehouse workers, and even brokers. I want to address a few major questions people have been asking. 1. The sentiment regarding blame for this situation seems to split about 20 to 80, with most Kentuckians blaming Canadians for boycotting their products without considering the nuances. It is unfortunate, and I wish they could understand why Canadians and other Americans would stop buying our products. However, one lesson from the past decade is that we live in a post-truth era where facts often fail to alleviate anger. I worked on Alison Lundergan Grimes' campaign as well as Amy McGrath's, both of which lost to a man who has caused irreparable damage to America. It's worth noting that many Republicans also dislike Mitch McConnell, but they see him as providing Kentucky with national representation. The belief that having him as Senate Majority Leader allows for more good for Kentucky is common among Republicans who would otherwise vote him out. I find this upsetting but believe it is possible to replace his seat with a Democrat in the future. I want to emphasize that I believe the boycott is a good thing. While it will hurt people in Kentucky, I think this hardship may be necessary. My concern is not for those who voted for Trump this time around, but for their children, grandchildren, and generations to come, who will suffer as towns decline, crime rates rise, and isolationism grows. I hope this addresses some questions, and I am happy to respond to any messages later today. Story 7. I feel like the average Make America Great Again supporter is going to need to personally feel the pain before they will change their minds. It will happen sooner rather than later, but for now they are probably feeling confident without realizing they will be getting far fewer opportunities in the near future. Story 8. I am a liberal from Kentucky and work in one of the famous distilleries in production. I haven't heard of anything affecting us yet, but I can't imagine it won't happen sooner rather than later. Most of my co-workers support former President Trump and act like nothing is happening. I also overheard a group discussing how individuals who have been deceased for 300 years are receiving Social Security benefits. Story 9. A concern my dad brought up at dinner the other night is that liquor is largely a matter of personal preference. It may remind you of a favorite time during college or a different point in your life. All it takes is a single bad experience, and you may never buy it again. Things won't go back to normal, even if the trade war ends tomorrow. Story 10. I saw a post on Reddit, but I can't remember if it was about leopards. One of the bourbon companies blamed Canadians for the unfair tariffs. The situation is mind-boggling, yet not surprising. Story 11. We deserve it. If there's one thing I'm glad for, it's that Mitch McConnell lived long enough to feel regret. I just hope the floor is okay after his last collapse. Story 12. Left-leaning Kentuckian here. I think we all hope it will bring the price of bourbon down. I find this venture with tariffs foolish, and I'm appalled by how our allies are being treated. Story 13. I work with the Glenmore Distillery, and it is concerning that many of their products are being removed from shelves. There is little we can do until the situation regarding tariffs is resolved, but locally we are worried that it will impact production and jobs. You would be surprised to learn how significant a supplier we are to Canada and similar markets. Story 14. I feel depressed. It is less about our industry and more about the fact that my neighbors insist that the former president is doing everything they voted for. They are traitors. All of them. Story 15. My concern is that Trump is targeting supporters in red states to blame Canada as a whole, influencing us to support military action against them. Many are angry, unemployed, and unable to see beyond their hatred for the opposing side. The saddest part is that I believe it is entirely possible for a significant portion of the country to align with this perspective. It seems unlikely that their leader is actively working to undermine our rights as citizens. Story 16. As a Kentuckian, I voiced my opinion to some Republican friends in our discussions about how the law is applied, who gets arrested for what, and what legal penalties apply to them. About a decade ago, I stated that if laws were actually enforced as written without prejudice for wealth, status, or office, Donald Trump should have been tried for treason and espionage and been executed before a military tribunal in accordance with the Military Code of Justice. The president sits at the top as commander-in-chief, apparently immune by executive fiat unrelated to any statute or constitutional provision, to prosecution in civilian courts. However, he has no such protection from the military, in my opinion, as a non-lawyer. My opinion has not changed, and this was before he attempted a literal insurrection and was declared king by the Supreme Court. Such is the rule of law in America these days. Whiskey is the least of what this human-shaped garbage has done to this country and this state. Donald Trump, Mitch McConnell, Rand Paul, and the other Republican legislators who have led this state to generations of poverty and suffering can take a long walk off a short dock for all I care for them. Story 17. Hi. I was born and raised in southeastern Kentucky. They just built a large bourbon barrel factory in my hometown. My grandfather cried tears of joy for all the jobs it would bring to our community. Yet, he still voted for the government that could potentially harm our already impoverished community. There are no jobs in my town. You can earn minimum wage at one of the 3 call centers we have or work at Walmart, but there is truly no opportunity here to build a decent living. That factory was our hope, and now it hangs in a precarious state. I doubt it will ever open its doors. I will tell you right now that I am an empathetic person. I always have been. The people in my community don't share that sentiment. I live in a strongly conservative county within a strongly conservative state. As much as I dislike this backward, racist town, my heart aches for what could have been. My community will continue to decline, lacking career opportunities or the potential for true happiness. I no longer live in my hometown. I am just passing through in my RV to see my family. But I see the hopelessness in this community is ever present and is about to get much worse. Story 18. For Kentucky, it will be rough, but it's not those products that will really hurt things. Already, a nearly $200 million factory has been pulled out of what I believe is Hopkinsville due to changing market conditions that would have made certain parts for batteries. I expect several other major investments and grants will be pulled soon. Our auto industry is likely in trouble. If you do not know, Kentucky is the 3rd highest auto employer as a percentage of population. Given that no cars are 100% made in the United States, tariffs and a chaotic market will not be good. The huge irony, which would be funny if these weren't people's lives, is that Trump insists on pretending to encourage manufacturing, but his tariff war is just going to restrict it. Story 19. I am a native Kentuckian who went to high school with Governor Andy Beshear back in the 1990s. I have also lived in Toronto for the past 15 years, so I have deep ties to both Kentucky and Canada. The point I would like to make is one that Prime Minister Trudeau made in his speech yesterday. Trade wars have no winners. In this case, both Kentucky and Canada lose, and Canadians boycotting bourbon are not just sticking it to the other side. Let me explain. Though the original questioner did not claim that all $9.3 billion in Kentucky exports to Canada is whiskey, this conversation has largely focused on bourbon. Fair enough, it is deeply symbolic of my home state, which is predominantly Republican, despite having a Democratic governor. I understand why Maker's Mark disappearing from Liquor Control Board of Ontario shelves while Crown Royal remains feels like a statement. But here is what is lost in that picture. The whiskey trade goes both ways. Kentucky imported nearly as much whiskey from Canada, $40 million, as it exported, $43 million, in 2023. More importantly, Kentucky imported $55 million in Canadian malted barley and rye, 2 key bourbon ingredients. If bourbon sales stall or distilleries scale back, Canadian farmers take a hit too. And bourbon? It is a drop in the bucket. It made up less than 0.5% of Kentucky's exports to Canada. The real economic heavyweight? Cars and car parts. $3.7 billion worth in 2023. It is easy to slap a slogan on a hat or turn bourbon into a symbol of the trade war. But trade is not symbolic, it is economic reality. Boycotts and tariffs do not just punish one side. They ripple out, hurting workers, businesses, and farmers in both countries. Trade wars have no winners, just higher prices, lost jobs, and economic pain for everyone. Story 20. I am from Kentucky. Here's my perspective. You get what you pay for. You own what you get. Sooner or later, what you own returns to you. Kentucky chose Trump when they voted for him. Kentuckians own that decision. Now the consequences of that decision are becoming apparent. Perhaps next time, those who contributed to this situation will exercise more caution in their choices. Votes matter. Elections have consequences. Story 21. People of Kentucky, this is about business. It's called a pump and dump scheme. First, you impose a tariff to make the company go bankrupt. Then, a billionaire swoops in to buy the business for a fraction of its value. The new owner has a friend remove the tariff, and the business is back up and running under a new owner of their choosing. Story 22. I am a lifelong Kentuckian. I did not vote for this, and those who did so twice are incomprehensible to me. We are not all backward individuals who vote against our own self-interest. I am concerned because Appalachia has always been neglected since the Civil War, and the former president does not care about us or our region. Story 23. I am enjoying a new bottle of Blackberry Crown Royal. Pairs well with lemonade. Story 24. As long as their children do not have to compete against a transgender athlete or see a rainbow in the classroom, I bet they are thrilled. Story 25. I know the question was posed to Kentucky. However, as a conservative Canadian, I could understand tariffs if Canada, for example, had done something egregious to harm the United States in violation of our agreements. That hasn't happened. Fentanyl was part of the excuse for Canadian tariffs, along with concerns about illegal human entries and being taken advantage of. The United States border intercepted just 0.2% of all border seizures of fentanyl that originated from Canada. By the same logic, Canada should have unilaterally imposed tariffs previously. Approximately 90% of gun crimes, including murder, robbery, and gang violence, in Canada are committed with smuggled guns of United States origin. By this logic, that should be addressed on the United States side of the border with tariffs. The same applies to illegal migrants from the United States into Canada and to drugs. I want our border security and military significantly increased, and trust me, it's not in the interests of the United States, specifically this administration. I love Kentucky and Tennessee whiskeys, and this situation is disappointing. My grandfather on my father's side was a Marine serving in Shanghai, so I have family and business connections in the United States. Throughout my adulthood, I have defended criticism of the United States and admired the idea of the country and its global role. I defended Republican presidents with the exception of the current administration. I supported our cooperation with the United States in Afghanistan. Now, with the perception of Canada as the 51st state and these tariffs, this betrayal of friends, allies, and trading partners likely has consequences that go well beyond this election cycle. No offense, but if I wanted to be American, I would have pursued that a long time ago. Where I live, we will determine what nation our soil belongs to. My apologies for butting in with my rant. I just wanted to provide perspective on why this is happening and what the outcomes will be. I'm not a fan of my current government, but I support any and all sanctions coming back until all tariffs are removed. Hopefully, one day I will be buying products from and vacationing in the United States again. Story 26. This is a completely justifiable response from Canada. I have no idea why Donald Trump has decided to wage a trade war on our closest allies, but here we are. Honestly, I'm glad Canada is doing this, as I think the only way Republicans will ever shift away from Trump is when it affects them directly. I say this as someone who lives and grew up in towns built around these distilleries. These people will shout America first without understanding that the biggest reason America achieved its height is because of its alliances. I hate to see this affect Canadians and my fellow Americans who never bought into Trump's agenda. I'm not looking forward to the impacts this will have on my state, but I'm far more worried about the broader ramifications of his administration and what that means for the world at large. Story 27. I'm going to be honest. I think that Trump could stand in front of a supporter's house and set it on fire while they watch, and they would still find some way to praise him and blame Democrats. I don't think that the loss of jobs in Kentucky will affect this. I don't think that the loss of revenue in Kentucky will affect this. I don't think that the loss of Medicaid in Kentucky will affect this. If food stamps are actually taken away, that might cause a problem, but again, I think they will just find some way to blame Democrats. The lack of education and literacy in Kentucky is astonishing and terrifying. Story 28. I've been a resident of the Bluegrass my whole life. This will hurt Kentucky long-term, but I support Canada's free market right to choose who they buy from completely. The first thing to know about Kentucky is that we don't have a lot of industry. Half the major manufacturing plants are in Louisville, Jefferson County, the highest income county to my knowledge, and the rest are mining-related, automotive manufacturing, and distilleries scattered around the rural areas of the state. We have committed strongly to bourbon tourism to fuel the economy, and a significant portion of our workforce depends on jobs related to growing rye and corn, making barrels, distilling, and managing the tourist sites. Any decline in the industry is likely to hurt the lowest income people in the state the most, especially because of how far out in the rural counties these places are. They provide the most stable income that many people can find. The other option was the planned electric vehicle manufacturing plants, but with the rollback of environmental initiatives, there is not going to be nearly the push to build those anymore. We already had, I think, 2 of the planned 3 battery plants and their construction. Those plants employ, and I'm not exaggerating, thousands of people. The number of contractors involved was significant. But with that slowing down as well under the previous administration, that's a huge blow to a workforce in desperate need of stable middle-income work. Any rollback of educational assistance is going to hurt our already bottom-ranked educational levels, and fewer of those low-income rural homes will be able to afford even the local colleges. We also rely heavily on federal funds for Medicare. I hope that if a boycott is enough to actually affect sales, those who will inevitably get laid off understand that it was because the executive insulted our closest ally with excessive tariffs. This was one of the strongest ways to send a message to the administration, not that Canada has a problem with the people of Kentucky. We will be in a difficult situation if that comes to pass, and it will surely be a fight between our Democratic governor and Republican Congress. I know it's a pipe dream, but I want the people here to understand that the former president is directly working to undermine an already failing state. I love my home, but I have no illusions about how poor we are and how we are perceived. Mostly, I think I just pity the people who are misled into cheering for decisions that will likely harm them directly. Story 29. I voted for Harris, and they called the state before the polling places were closed. Sometimes it feels hopeless voting progressively in Kentucky. A lot of it is due to gerrymandering and other issues. Not the president, obviously. Story 30. I give you Gene Wilder's quote to the sheriff in Blazing Saddles. You have to remember that these are just simple farmers. These are people of the land, the common clay of the New West. Morons. Story 31. I am worried about my situation and my family. The cuts to Medicaid will negatively impact Eastern Kentucky. I work in healthcare, and I am concerned about my job. I do not blame Canada. The United States is on the wrong side of history at this moment. Story 32. As a Canadian, I really don't want to do what we have to do. Checking everything to see if it's made in the United States is tedious. Understand that we have no choice. We don't want to hurt the American people in any way. Most of them are good people, and we know that. We have been put into this position by the government. The only thing Americans can do is quietly keep track of who voted for this and hold those people responsible when things go wrong. This might be stereotypical, but we apologize. Story 33. As a Canadian, I always find it amusing when the claim about fentanyl flowing across the northern border is used to declare a security emergency, bypass Congress on tariffs, and ignore the agreement signed in 2018. It is difficult to address the issue of fentanyl crossing the northern border when the problem is nearly non-existent. Story 34. It is a foolish way to endanger the longest border in the world and a way to weaken the American empire. Then again, I may be too progressive for the Democrats, so perhaps I will tone it down and say, oh no, our precious bourbon isn't selling to the Canadian people. Story 35. I am a Canadian living in Kentucky. I look forward to bourbon exports declining, which may lead to lower prices on premium bourbons. However, I do not expect that to happen. I feel sad that my neighbors may lose their jobs if mid-level bourbon production decreases. In any case, Canada produces fine whiskeys and does not need to import bourbon. Story 36. Kentuckian here. It will absolutely impact all of us, whether we are directly involved in the industry or not, and regardless of how much bourbon, if any, we consume. The bourbon industry is a massive part of Kentucky's economy, so when it takes a hit, there are ripples that affect multiple industries. One example that comes to mind is charitable giving and nonprofit funding from the Brown-Forman Foundation, a major benefactor to the arts and culture sector, sustainability, and basic needs in impoverished communities. If Brown-Forman shrinks, so will the good it is able to do in Kentucky. Most of the distilleries, regardless of their owners' donations, give a lot back to this state. We will all be worse off when that money goes away and there is nothing available to replace it. Story 37. The average Kentuckian will have no idea that this is happening. Their news sources never report anything that reflects negatively on Donald Trump. I work with these people. They live in an alternate universe where Elon Musk is uncovering significant government waste and corruption, and Trump is going to stop taxing their overtime. Story 38. Kentuckian here. This is the definition of mess around and find out. Eventually, we will start losing jobs, and it is sad that most of us will not even wake up to Trump's absurdity even then. Story 39. For the next 4 years, I will be saying, FAFO. Many people will lose their jobs, homes, and almost everything because of the tariffs. However, they will blame everyone except Trump. Story 40. They are in a cult. They all fell in love with him when he was a reality television star and think he can walk on water. Anything he does, no matter how harmful it is to them, as long as he claims it is beneficial, they will endure. It is the same in every state. It is absolutely pathetic that not one of them has the initiative to actually verify any of the countless lies he has told the American people. Story 41. Proud child of Kentucky. Good for Canada. Fight back against this horrible culture in any way you can. Story 42. Their senator is Mitch McConnell, and he has been in office since 1985. Winning elections for 40 years makes it clear that they will stick with Trump and the Republican Party until their resources are completely depleted. Story 43. Originally from Kentucky, I moved to Hawaii a few months ago. It is unfortunate that Kentucky is set to experience a significant setback to its already struggling economy because of the actions of an immature leader. It is disheartening that my struggling family will face more challenges due to their decision to support someone driven by hatred and unfounded conspiracy theories. They see nothing wrong with this leader's actions and actually encourage them. I have reached a point where I need to distance myself because I can no longer bear to witness their reckless behavior. It is truly disheartening. I support Canada standing firm and not compromising while this leader pursues his agenda. I feel sorry for those who will be caught in the crossfire until it is over. Story 44. As a Kentuckian, I didn't vote for any of this. I've emphatically voted against Donald Trump 3 times now. I don't understand his appeal. I think he is a terrible human being who has brought out the worst in both my state and my country. That being said, I completely understand. I don't blame Canadians for boycotting American products. Whatever harm it causes us was asked for. The entire situation could have been easily avoided by not voting a fraud into the highest office. Furthermore, this will most likely be the least of our worries if Republican politicians and voters do not hold him accountable. Story 45. I have lived in Kentucky my whole life. I understand what this means, but I am surrounded by people who could not spell tariff, let alone define or understand it. Story 46. I am not a native of the state, but I am a resident and I love it. Boycott U.S. goods. People need to suffer, apparently, to realize how misguided these policies are. Even if you support protectionist tariffs or isolationist mercantilism, I don't understand how anyone could think these immediate, knee-jerk policies are good for the country or Americans. The lack of a phase-in time will only hurt American consumers, workers, and business owners, which includes the majority of Americans. Story 47. I am not a fan. Bourbon aside, why start a trade war with one of our biggest allies? If you want to use tariffs, which I am not advocating for at all, Why not focus on countries where US companies outsource manufacturing to obtain cheap labor? That is certainly not Canada. Story 48. As someone who lives in Kentucky and has worked in Nelson County with people in the bourbon industry, I have concepts of thoughts and prayers. I can't tell you how many people criticize unions while praising Trump, only to later accept union jobs for their benefits and pay. These are the same individuals who consistently vote against their own interests. Story 49. I'm from Eastern Kentucky specifically. A few years ago, a company promised to build a factory in a remote area. The coal industry is gone, AK Steel is gone, and people are struggling to leave. This company seemed like a ray of hope for them. Unfortunately, they withdrew their plans and left. There is a stigma against hiring people who are illiterate or struggling with addiction. However, the residents in that area remember a time of prosperity when coal boomed and continue to hold on to hope that industry will return. They are even expanding a road in anticipation of it, which will require imminent domain actions. The coal industry is gone. Tobacco is gone. Alcohol is probably the last viable income source that Kentucky has. We have some cattle, but there are larger suppliers. Given the current challenges in that industry, it is uncertain how long it will sustain itself. Yet, no one wants to admit that the state is facing serious decline. A rural, uneducated population persists in doing things the same way they always have, stubbornly clinging to a bygone era and the belief that it will return. In summary, Kentucky is in a dire situation and too stubborn to recognize the reality. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.